So here's a little bit on the flow for the day. We just finished our cultural opening that I'll send you the YouTube link for today's focus. I'm going to go into our equity learning frames pretty quickly. For those of you who attended our Standards and Equity Institute last June, this is some of that repeated content, but I do understand that the majority of our teachers have not seen these, so that's why I do want to review them. And then we're going to kind of get into the actual topic for today, right? So I'm going to introduce Jerry Theo from the National Compadres Network and the framework around La Cultura Cura. And then I want to hear from you. I want to leverage our assets because I know that some of you are already engaging young people in this way and building that sense of belonging in your classrooms already. And then I do want to get to building knowledge, right? So this is a key part of what we do as an Office of Equity, whether it's our African American manhood development courses, our Latino men and boys Joven Noble circles, our African American female excellence girl circles, our Pacific Islander circles, right? Is we always try to give young people an opportunity to understand their history and how we've all been impacted, you know, by the legacy of oppression and colonization, and how it is a great responsibility, you know, for educators to actually think about how we address that historical trauma and deculturalization that has happened in schools.
Raquel, did you want to share your? Were you intending to share the slideshow, because we don't have you don't have the screen sharing on right now?
Oh, I thought I did. I'm sorry about that.
No problem. We enjoy looking at your backgrounds.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you for bearing with me. Okay, and then we're gonna kind of wrap up with an overview of strategies that you are actually going to lift up, and then strategies in the Office of Equity to nurture cultural academic identity. And we're gonna do a chat box checkout and end the way that I intended to start. So really quickly, right, this work is, you know, about how it's all about equity, right? So at our Standards and Equity Institute, we heard our superintendent speak to this, right? And her ask of us is to really think about what equity means in our classrooms. And so she named that equity in OUSD is about engaging students with standards-based instruction, right? And recognizing that the lack of quality in our system is not by accident, it's by design. And it's a consequence, and it is the unchecked impact of the legacy of colonization and oppression in this country. So I think it's really important that, you know, as educators in the system and really all adults in our buildings, to be grounded in that history, right? And understanding that everyone is in a different journey with healing from the impact of colonization and oppression. So we understand that the legacy of that actually lives in us, right? At the end of the day, we are the individuals that make up a school building. We are the individuals that make up an entire system, right? So we have to kind of understand that because we live in the United States, all of us have bias, right? We've inherited that, we've learned that. And so we all have internalized notions of racism, sexism, classism, all the isms, right? We've internalized those notions, and those play out in the way that we relate to each other. And then, because people make up institutions, some of our decisions are, based on those conscious and unconscious beliefs. So again, just kind of sharing the definition that we've landed on as OUSD, right? That part of engaging students with standards-based instruction, we have to do that with asset-based practice. And part of that includes developing every student's cultural academic identity and sense of belonging as a learner. And that's what we're talking about today. And then it also means engaging in our own transformative equity learning, right? So what is that learning that we need to do about ourselves, our own histories, the history of others, but then also how historical trauma, personal trauma, environmental trauma, how all of that has impacted us, right? And then supporting each other in these journeys, right? To lead, learn, and teach with an asset-based equity mindset. And then these are kind of the 4 equity learning questions, right? That we're introducing in our journeys as educators. Not for us to solve today or even at the end of the year, but just more, guiding questions for our learning. So today we're focusing on the green here. How can we integrate students' linguistic and cultural assets? Okay, so finally we're here. So what is La Cultura Cura? So I've been kind of blessed to meet and learn from Jerry Theo of the National Compadres Network, and more closely with Samuel Martinez, who is also a part of the National Compadres Network. He is local from this community. He was active in the Chicano movement here in Oakland. And so, this is a national network of Chicano men, that have come together to really develop this model around health and healing for people of color, for children, adults, older people alike, right? And so what this is, it's a health and healing philosophy that emphasizes the importance of our cultural values, traditions, and indigenous practices in restoring one's cultural identity. It also emphasizes that the healing and mastering of our cultural identities is foundational for the well-being of individuals, families, community, and the entire society. So before I kind of keep going on this, I do want to check in with folks in the chat. I've been talking a lot. If you can kind of think about, what is one thing that you already do to build belonging and cultural academic identity in your classroom? And what I mean by cultural academic identity is beyond that scholar identity, right? Many of us refer to our kids as scholars. In the Office of Equity, we refer to our students as kings and queens, right? Because they come from greatness. So what is one thing that you do to build belonging and cultural academic identity in your classroom? And if you could say your name and your school as well.
And Raquel, while people are working on that, we did get a request. Is it possible to share the slide deck so that people can refer to it and share it with their colleagues as well? If you're not able to do that right now, we could do that later on.
Yes, the link to the video, you mean?
Your slideshow.
Oh, I will. So I can, let's see. I can actually do that right now as people are typing in the chat box.
That's great. So as Raquel is working on that, if you can just put in your, in the chat box, just let us know who you are, school, the subject, and then the question that Raquel was referring to. What is the one thing you do to build belonging and cultural academic identity in your classroom? Thank you, Sonia. Appreciate that. And there's the slideshow link that Raquel just posted in the chat box as well. Thank you, Raquel.
Yes, thank you, Dina. Yes, so acknowledging culture with pride and dignity. Books, right? I saw Sonia has books from various backgrounds, celebrations and affirmations, definitely. Thank you, Denise. Yes, windows and mirrors. Thank you, Molly. Yes, it's important for students to see themselves reflected in the stories and experiences that they're reading. Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing. Yes, so I see Molly is asking, one thing that she wants to get better at is engaging in our own work to explore our own cultural identities. Yes, definitely. So that we can do that more authentically for our students. And Stephen from Encompass, right? Engaging families in class and incorporating that into daily routines. Yes. Thank you all for sharing. Yes, and then Denise is also sharing in terms of sharing boards, multicultural, bilingual, bicultural depictions. Mm-hmm. Yes, filling our hallways, our classrooms with all of that, right? With art, with culture, with images. Yes, thank you, Josh. Music, right? Thank you. So we're gonna move on. Thank you all for sharing. Activating our own knowledge here as a community is important, right? Because we're also modeling that we're already doing that and we have knowledge to share with each other. So I'm gonna go back to presentation mode here. So I think it's important that we acknowledge why this is important, right? And just seeing what everyone has shared, I know that you already know some of this, right? And so if I could recommend 2 readings today, you know, for you to get more grounded in how deculturalization has happened in the United States in an actual intentional way, right? Is, you know, Joe Spring's book, Deculturalization and the Struggle for Equality. It's a must read so that we're grounded in that history of African Americans and the education system, you know, Asian Americans and the education system, Chicanos and Latinos in the education system, right? Because deculturalization was an actual strategy, right? And so to remove culture from somebody's identity and to do the opposite, right? To degrade it, dehumanize, you know, put in this other category, it does something to the spirit, the mind, and then later the body, right? And so this other piece by Marcos Pizarro out of San Jose State University, he is actually one of the scholars that I've engaged with for the past 20 years in trying to develop a really a model for healing in schools where we're actually always making space to build knowledge, you know, to make space to acknowledge the trauma, you know, and that soul wound that has been carried on through generations. And then also making space to envision, you know, what our decolonized selves might look like, right? And I know I'm like using a lot of words that aren't normally used in PDs, but I really recommend that you guys read these 2 pieces here. I did want to take an excerpt from Marcos's article here, where he talks about how Native African American and Pacific Islander scholars have actually done extensive research on historical trauma, right? And so what he says is that scholars who have been investigating the effects of these historical legacies agree that the violent acts of slavery and conquest impact entire communities in ways that have shaped the lives of each future generations, right? And so these acts of cultural genocide create a soul wound in the survivors. And you know, the consequence of that are psychological and emotional, right? And so we have to do everything that we can to learn about our origins, right? To restore that cultural identity. I saw that some folks thank you all for continuing to engage in the chat. Okay, so I want to get to, you know, this notion around communicating and communicating with the purpose of building relationship and connection, right, in everything that we do. And so some of the key strategies to nurture that cultural and linguistic identity really falls under these two ways of being, really, right? So the first one is around building empowering narratives. And so the two ways that we consistently can do that in our classrooms, and the ways that we are doing that, and the ways that you've already shared that you're doing that, relationship building with families, right? And I have links here to the parent-teacher home visit model that many of our schools have adopted district-wide as the foundational way of building relationships with families and learning about each other's cultures, right? And it's really based on this hopes and dreams conversation. And so what this does is it allows families to know that you care before they can care about what you know, right? And then knowledge building. So I've linked here resources, and this actually links back to our Office of Equity page with different resources. Some of you probably have already seen this. We have some of those children's books, ways to talk to engage young people in conversations around race. So building empowering narratives, right? Some of you already mentioned, you know, filling up your walls, building boards with images, infusing your one of your rituals with music, bringing in families, right? And then we have countering deficit thinking and knowledge and language. And so we want to do things where our kids see, hear, and feel their culture and language being affirmed, right? And a lot of this is a repeat of what some of you have already shared. All right, so thank you for bearing with me. This is definitely different from sharing in person, so I appreciate that you all are still here with me. So I want to actually go back to our framework here, right? And kind of focusing in on healing and mastering of our cultural identities, right? And so somebody mentioned in the chat that they actually want to learn, you know, how do I learn about myself first so that I can do that with my students more authentically. And I'm going to say that that's a huge part of the work. And so I'm going to open it up to the group here, right? So what are some of the things that we can do to master our own cultural identity? And you can unmute yourself. And this is where I want us to share about our own personal journeys in being grounded in our own cultures and histories. Would anyone like to share? Hi, Michelle.
Hello, hi. So basically knowing the true history of your ancestors and your engagement here in the United States historically, which is a huge, you know, component, and there's so many layers to it. But, you know, knowing yourself is really a lifelong journey, constantly changing here in America when, you know, there's still no equity here. So it's always going to be a struggle, but that's what I have to contribute.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, learning about yourself is a lifelong journey. And as I started off with our framing, right, that's actually one of our shared agreements, right, is, you know, accepting that none of us are experts. We're always learning and teaching each other. And because, you know, this history goes back centuries, more than 500 years, right? In some ways, many of us will never know what our true indigenous identities and traditions are or were. So right now, you know, we're engaged in this cultural restoration and healing movement, right? And so it's about learning about the core beliefs, you know, of that ancestral wisdom and applying it to the world that we live in today. So yes, you know, a lot of that is a lifelong journey, right? Because a lot, you know, we're not going to get all of that from reading all the books on Chicano history, for example, if I'm talking about myself, right? I actually have to be exposed and learning in person, you know, from others that are also engaged in this journey. Anybody else want to share about their own personal journeys around mastering cultural identity?
Go.
Yes.
Good morning. My name is
Good morning.
Stephen Valadez from Encompass Academy also. Michelle is a colleague of mine.
Hi,
And
Stephen.
as I was growing up, I went to private schools. My parents really wanted to, you know, do everything that they could that they felt would give me a leg up. My father was an immigrant from Mexico. And growing up, there's this American culturally shared idea of, at least that I perceived, about going through school, going through high school, going through college, and then getting a job. But as I started moving through those phases of education, I really didn't see anybody like myself. And so that sense of belonging and, you know, where do I go and where do I fit in after this part of my journey is finished, it was real unsettling to me that when I would think about continuing my education, I felt really isolated because even in the private school that I went to, there was a small group of Latino students as well. And so I think it's very important for us to start making a really conscious effort for students of color that come from different cultures to help them to see themselves just in society, you know, in different, it's okay for you to have different interests outside of your culture that may not, you know, necessarily be associated with Latinos. And, you know, I'm inspired by a lot of the generation that's come after me because I see that they're fearless in being themselves and engaging in hobbies. And so I think as much as we can as educators, it's very important for us to show our students, to allow them to see themselves in the world and to acknowledge their funds of knowledge.
Thank you, Stephen.
I think what Stephen said was very good. I also I don't know if anyone can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Denise.
Hi, my sister. I'm Denise from Howard Elementary. I want to start out by saying your background is so fabulous. It's so culturally specific. It makes me think of, it was a very tempered Cinco de Mayo, but the celebration, and it was beautiful. I think my work was very similar to Stephen's. I went to let me say, a very white Catholic institution throughout, but it made me want to be more African centric and more
Mhm.
African involved and it made me it just makes you more want to study what you're about. So that's why I like when you were talking about soul wounds, those things you were saying. It's like Dr. Joy LaGrue, who's out of Sacramento. I mean, she's doing that in terms of the African American community.
Mhm.
John Powell from Cal. And then the person you met, he's dynamic from San Jose State. It would be great for him to come to the district and speak. But yeah, my own path led me to really want to be instilled in my African self. Like there's a sister in the chat. She mentioned descendants of. She does an ancestors class. I think that's powerful. I
Mhm.
went down south by people from Louisiana, Texas, and then I tied with this whole migration, at least from Oakland right now to Ghana. So my friends are like on lockdown there, and sharing those past as well as respecting, the past of my Latino and Arabic brothers and sisters, who the Arabic, the ones that I know, the Yemenis, they're on Ramadan right now. So my whole
Yes.
classwork centers around their prayers. So it's pretty interesting. And thank you.
Thank you, Denise, for sharing. Um, Thank you. Hearing you all helps me connect back to myself, right? And connect to to all of you in a very real way. I am definitely more relaxed now. I don't know if you could tell I was so nervous, and then the technical issues were that just really threw off my flow. So appreciate you all, and thank you for sharing. Yeah, so this is exactly what happens, right, when in the classroom we allow for that sharing to also take place with our students. And I think it really starts with us connecting and sharing with each other as colleagues. And so what I want to do also is just offer myself as a resource. I know that in this era of distance learning, it's really hard to build virtual community, and there is a learning curve for all of us, right? So some of the beautiful norms and rituals that we have established at our schools, that is disruptive. And I know that our students are really missing that, and so I'm wondering how we can continue to do that virtually. And so when this opportunity to have this hour with you came up, at first I was a little hesitant, right? I'm like, wow, how am I going to connect with people over a Zoom meeting, And so again, that's not the Office of Equity way, right? The Office of Equity way is let me lean into this discomfort and fear and just dive into it, right? So I hope that this time together was somewhat worth it. I hope that it helps you to it helps to encourage you to figure out how to continue this building virtual community and connection with each other as colleagues and with your students, right? It's, I would say, even more critical now, because we're all going through a lot, not just our kids. We're going through a lot as well. So this work is even more relevant in these times. Okay, so we're about 10 minutes out. I do want to give a chance for anybody else to kind of share their journeys, right, around healing and restoring cultural identity. Your own journey.
This is Mary Scott. Can you hear me, Raquel?
Yes. Hi, Mary.
Hi. Some years ago, when I was in the classroom as a classroom teacher, I developed several lessons around culture, and one was very successful, actually. It was called 4 Foot Feet, and it was a writing lesson that focused mainly on students' ancestral history. And the ultimate goal was for them to write a 5-paragraph essay featuring their ancestors and putting together a photo image of all the people that are mentioned in their essay. And they framed their essay with the pictures of their ancestors. And what they learned from it is the names of their ancestors, because, you know, we all have, you know, nicknames for family members, especially grandparents and great-grandparents.
Yes.
A fun experience. And at the end, we hung them on the wall and introduced our families to other members of the class. And I can't tell you how happy and excited these kids were to be able to find out what they share in common with each other, despite nationalities,
Yes.
ethnic backgrounds, etc. And I'd love to share that with you in short, and I'll send it to you.
That would be beautiful. Thank you so much. Yes, and so thank you for sharing. And that's the other thing that that's the other great thing that comes out of this, right? Is that our young people then begin to see each other as allies, right? And so that multiracial solidarity building kind of happens naturally. Thank you for that.
Welcome.
Right.
English, please. I don't understand what that means.
Okay. So one of the other rituals, and I know that most of you probably do this in your team meetings as well, and also in your classroom, right, is having a ritual, you know, to close out an activity, to close out your day, close out a session. And again, this is something that emphasizes communication with each other with a focus on connection and relationship building. So I always like to, one of the checkouts that I like to do is just doing appreciation shout outs, right? It's another way of doing affirmations as a community and getting in the habit of affirming and raising each other up, you know, recognizing that brilliance and speaking to the gifts that we give one another. So if we can actually, instead of typing in the chat box, if I can have a couple of people actually say it out loud, an appreciation shout out for a colleague that's either here or not here. It could be on anything, right? So any appreciation that's in your heart right now.
I'm going to step back because I already had a chance to share, but I had to take an opportunity to thank Kellis. I think I've seen him every single day during this quarantine. He's been working so hard to help facilitate these webinars. And so I just wanted to get an opportunity to say thank you, Kellis, for all the work that you're doing to help us out during this time.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it.
I like that. I like to thank that sister. Her dreadlock, I love that. Looks like a Native American or indigenous or African thing on your dreads. And so I'd like to put a shout out to everyone in the district. They're so creative. And to see that people can be openly like that in a place of work is affirming to me. I'd like to put a shout out to the webinar series that is being conducted by Kelly, but also other people in his department. And what I like about it is all this, I mean, it's like a wide open world, like a global world. So you can go places and get access to things to help your kids, especially in the last ELL classes I've taken. And I'd like to shout out to everyone who's practicing Ramadan right now, because I just don't know how you could do that. I affirm that culture, the Yemenis. I mean, and I'm as I said, in real time. Trying to and I am respecting their prayer time around curriculum. Something I've never really had to be faced with. I am hoping increasingly there are more tools to support that community as it appears they're growing. At least at Howard they are, and I'm sure throughout the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Dina. Anybody else that wants to share a shout out?
Sonia, I can't hear her.
Well, I'd like to shout out to OUSD for the distance learning program. Some schools opted out and decided to close their schools because they found the distance learning very complicated. So it's been a strain on all of us, but we lived up to it. So yay to OUSD.
Thank you, Mary. If there are no more shout outs, thank you all for sharing.
I'd like to do a shout out. Can I?
Yes, please,
Can
Michelle.
you hear me? I like what everyone else is shouting out, so I want to put some energy on that. I agree. And also to all of the colleagues that I'm working with at Compass, who are really working very hard to bring continuity and a substance to the learning and engagement that we're doing. I'd like to shout out to you, sister, for your moderation of this webinar. And also, I'd like to do a shout out to Denise Gums. So this is Michelle Lee from back in the art and apartheid days.
Hey, girl! Hey! Hey! I wonder that is South African beads on your lock. I'd like to shout out.
Yep.
Nice. South Africa. Look like Zulu. I want to know about her background.
Yeah.
Is that material, Raquel, in your background? Is that something we can take home for our training?
I'm sorry, which one?
Your background is so nice. It looks like Aztec. It looks somewhat.
Yeah, so this is actually artwork from the 2016 Peace and Dignity Journeys. So that's actually an intercontinental run, indigenous spiritual run. And it actually has been going on since 1992. It's from the prophecy of the eagle and the condor. It's a prophecy across the Americas that basically says that after 500 years of colonization, oppression, and suffering, will begin 500 years of restoration and healing. Thank you for asking. This is a great closing. And so what has happened is that for years, different runners from the various First Nations across the continent of the Americas, from the end of Argentina to the tip of Alaska, they start running and they meet in the middle of the continent. And so all along the way, they share songs and stories as part of that restoration of culture, right? And so that's a run that I'm a part of, and I keep it in my background because the run was canceled this year, but we're still connected virtually in that way. Thank you for asking.
It's beautiful. Looks like that. Diego Rivera's work. It's beautiful.
Thank you. So I can actually link it into the slide deck so that you have it as well.
Oh, I love it. I love it. The actual, we can get the actual one to keep. No, I'm teasing.
Yeah.
Sí se puede.
Yes. So I want to end with a song. And so this is one of the songs that I actually learned on the Peace and Dignity Run. It's a song dedicated to all of the women warriors and the struggle, the beautiful struggle every day. And it comes from Canada. And so before I end, I just want to point out that my email is here at the bottom of the slide. Let's continue building and learning from each other. Hey, 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 Yahio, Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio, Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio, hey, 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 Yahio. Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio, Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio, hey, 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 Yahio, Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio. Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio, hey, 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 Yahio, Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio, Yahio, hey, hey, Yahio. Thank you all. See you next time.
Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you, Raquel, thank you for the wonderful presentation today. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate your work not only today but all year and throughout the years. We really appreciate you bringing your lens of culture and equity to OUSD. And thank you, everyone, for joining today. We really appreciate you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Kelly, so much.
Thanks for